Preemptive radical inclusion is about figuring out before everyone is in the room who is likely to be in the room and being prepared for that. That's the nutshell. And the way we do that is that we assume that everyone is already in the room. On the most simple terms, if we're having an ice cream sundae party, we don't wait for someone to say, I can't eat this. Next time, will you please bring sugar-free ice cream? We make sure there is sugar-free ice cream when we serve it. On its most simple, that's the core, that's the nugget of this particular framework of doing justice. Now, if you were in this room, you've been working with all sorts of frameworks of justice and equity work for a long time. Some of you have written some of them. I'm somewhat intimidated that they're in the room. And we're going to talk today about this particular perspective. Preemptive radical inclusion is a way of looking at the world, assessing our role, assessing ourself. That's where it starts. We assess ourself, our role, our place in our power. And we identify what kind of action we can take to create equity and justice. Preemptive radical inclusion is preemptive because we do the work before someone shows up. We learn what we need to learn in order to make our definition of who we are, in order to make that circle so big that everyone is in it. When I was a kid, I was told to mind my P's and Q's when I went out around, people. It meant I was to be on good behavior, to be polite and respectful. This was challenging to me for two pretty basic reasons. First, my socialization on the farm where I grew up meant that I could call cows and I could birth calves. I could tend and pluck chickens. But I wasn't really taught much about human social behavior. Secondly, minding my P's and Q's was challenging because there's never been a great deal of distance between me having a thought and the words coming out of the mouth. And in fact, sometimes I find out what I think because, oh look, that's what I think. This was unfortunate. Nevertheless, it was expected that I would mind my manners. It was well into adulthood that I really started learning and putting into action what those manners were, what it meant to be with human people in relationship. I'll come back to that. A woman named Donna Markova wrote one of my favorite poems, which I'm going to read. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that that which came to me as a seed goes to the next as a blossom, and that which came to me as a blossom goes to the next as a fruit. We can be simultaneously afraid of falling or catching fire, and we can choose not to live that way. It's a paradox. It's a multiplicity. That circle is comfortable. We know what happens in that circle. We know how it works. We know what the rules are. I could tell you any number of things about cows. I knew what those rules were. That was comfortable for me. In our congregations, we have patterns and ways of being. I'm always really excited when I speak in a congregation, but it's people from all over, because it means that most of you aren't in your regular seat. Our perspectives get very particular in our congregational life. And we start to think that that particularity is what is normal or typical, but really it's just particular. I think that being able to hold a multiplicity of seemingly contradictory things, like I'm afraid of catching fire and I'm going to be brave anyway, It's a task of adulthood, but it's one that we must choose intentionally. We want our children to be safe, and we want our children to be free. This is a paradox that involves both fear and bravery. We want to end oppression and poverty, and we very much like our homes and our cars and our health care and other things that capitalism has granted us. I think that it's the nature of the universe to move towards entropy, to move towards a desire to be at rest, that leads us to long for simple answers. Even as we are denominationally, associationally, we are not people who settle for simple answers, and yet we want to rest. To fall naturally into an either-or experience of ourselves or of other people, or both. To tell the simplest story that permits us to assess ourselves, to judge ourselves or another, and then to move on. There is no easy answer to anything, as much as we wish there was one. There is no single right way to not live in fear, or to live in fear and be brave anyway, to accept our lives, to change our lives, to save our lives, to accept the world, to change the world, to save the world. The work we are called to do is not simple. Donna Markova again. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise.